Hi, Cody.
Hello.
Nice to meet you, buddy.
Hey, nice to meet you digitally.
All right, yeah, and God, I remember you from many years ago when you were a regular on Fox Business when they were launching that show, and used to pay attention to you because you kind of had a contrarian viewpoint. You looked at everything skeptically, contrarian-like nature. So great for you to join us. I've told our community a little bit about you and your community, Spotify, that you're a believer in community and social trading. Spotify is,
By the way,
yeah, it's a platform for that. But you know what, Cody, I like to
thanks for
start
the
from the
kind words.
beginning. We're celebrating Back to the Future. Everyone's talking about it. Let's go back to the past, and why don't you give me an idea of what it was like for you, how you got involved in the trading business? Did you have people that influenced you? The most treacherous part of the journey is the beginning. How did it start for Cody Willard?
Well, you're exactly right. Getting started is the toughest part. I bought a one-way ticket to Wall Street, to New York City from Albuquerque, where I graduated. I was a walk-on at the for the New Mexico Lobos on the basketball team, and when I graduated with a degree in economics, I wanted to take on the world.
Right.
So I bought a one-way ticket to New York and didn't have a job or much of anything lined up really, but I just went out there and jumped in head first and started off actually at Starbucks. It's my first job as a barista, and eventually I was going on all these cold calling interviews in these boiler rooms, connection. And without any experience, I mean, my parents had never owned a stock in their entire life, so it wasn't like I was around the market and had any idea. But
Right.
I wasn't dumb, I got to Wall Street and I quickly figured out that the boiler room approach and these cold calling, schlocky, smooth talking guys were probably not who I wanted to jump in bed with. And so,
Well, let me ask you this. When you went for a cup of coffee, did anyone say to you, hey, coffee's for closers?
no, I never got that far into the boiler room. I mean, I went on probably 5 or 6 interviews, and I never went back for the second interview or returned their phone calls. So I didn't get quite that far. At any rate, to fast forward a little bit, I eventually started writing, sending my resume, faxing my resume to anybody whose book I had read. And one of the books I had just finished when I got to New York was called Confessions of a Stockbroker, by Andrew Lanier, who was at the time about a 75-year-old Hungarian. He's passed away now. This is almost 20 years ago that I've hooked up with him. But I faxed my resume every week for 4 weeks in a row and called every week for 4 weeks in a row. And finally, the office manager happened to answer the phone when I called and said, send the resume again. And I sent it back in. And 4 days later, I had an interview with Andrew himself, and I got through there and became, about a year later, I was Andrew's first partner.
Wow. Well, how creative to
Well,
network yourself by, going after people that had writings that impressed you. That was a real creative way to market yourself, Cody. So what was the theme of the book? What were his confessions that as a stockbroker, don't most try and convert equity into commissions?
That's right. And I don't know that he admitted much of that dynamic in the book itself. I learned that after making partner with Andrew, the end part of that story was 2 months later. I was burned out, and I didn't want to be a partner in a brokerage firm and sell stocks to retail investors, where the incentive was indeed, as you're implying, to generate commissions and not necessarily make money. And
Right. So
it's
you
not
saw the inherent conflict of interest of being compensated based on trading volume rather than performance.
You've got it. You've got it exactly right. So I left and actually just went and started a rock band and wrote a novel. Went to Europe for a few months and wrote the great American novel that never got published. Came back, became an analyst inside of a venture capital incubator type of company, and soon thereafter, same sort of thing. I was reading Jim Cramer, and at the bottom of one of his articles, he said, "Hey, if you're an out-of-work Wall Street analyst, send us an email because we need readers." And this on his articles for TheStreet.com in like 1999 or 2000, and I just wrote in and said, look, I'm not an out-of-work Wall Street analyst, but I built a website, and it's called teleconomics.com or something like that, and it was all about analyzing the telecom industry. And he wrote back, said, that's great, let's get you writing. And eventually he put me on TV, and eventually Kudlow, his partner back in the day, was a big fan of mine, and eventually I ended up with my own show on Fox Business, as you talked about earlier.
Well, that's a great story, Cody. So as far as trading is concerned, everyone's familiar with Booyah. Okay, and okay, I want to make you feel at home. And I've also interviewed Larry Kudlow. He's a great political mind. What were the influences for you in trading? It sounds like you come from a fundamental background, but did you have to learn about price action and risk management? And were you self-taught, or did you have mentors when it came to the trading aspect of the business?
Well, Kramer himself, I think, has been a bit of a mentor to me in the trading world. He helped a hedge fund in 2002, including having put me on TV and introduced me to some of the sell-side guys and a prime broker at Bear Stearns and whatnot. And I launched a hedge fund at the bottom of the NASDAQ October 2002 and closed it in October 2007 when I took that job at Fox. And yeah, I will say that was definitely, learning on many ways. Kramer sat down with me over the years, about once a year, and we'd review my portfolio and talk about my trades and my trading styles. And I do think most important for any investor is to be independent thinking, as you talked about that I tried to do earlier. I want to be a contrarian, I want to be independent, and I want to be completely objective as much as I can. And I think that's part of it. I don't know that I have any true mentors or styles that I emulate. I'm my own person, my own thinker, and I try to take every stock, every market, every trade on its own merits.
Okay, so we've been in a central planning market for quite a few years. We finally got a 10% correction, which we hadn't had in 5 years. Fed on hold. The Fed, will they, won't they? Only your hairdresser knows for sure. What are you seeing in market structure right here? And I guess the million-dollar question, Cody, is, was that it? That pullback in S&P to 1830, and now the 2011 analog says we're going to new highs? Well, or are we going to revisit and flush out the people that are getting long stocks from late August and late September?
$1 million question, and let me preface my answer by saying I'm not trying to game the near-term move in the broader stock markets. I don't think the Federal Reserve matters, whether they raise rates from 0% to 0.25% or even 1%. We are still so far below a natural interest rate in the world, and in the United States specifically. There's what positioned for and made a lot of money in the last 5 years because I've been positioned for this bubble-blowing bull market. And that's the term I've been using. And the biggest dynamic, the biggest impetus, catalyst for that bubble-blowing bull market is indeed 0% interest rates or even 1% interest rates. I mean, you go back to 1999 and you remember that Alan Greenspan dropped rates to 1%, and that helped cause that last spike up from 99 to 2000 when the NASDAQ finally topped at 5,000, a level it didn't see for another 14 years. 1% is still way below market rate. So the point being, the Federal Reserve for the foreseeable future is probably driving a bubble-blowing bull market forward. Another thing that I think is important with the Federal Reserve as a look is that everybody's wrong when they tell you don't fight the Fed. You should always fight the Fed. The Federal Reserve is pretty much always going to be late both directions. And so you go back from 96 to 99 and the Federal Reserve was raising rates, and it was one of the biggest bull markets ever. From 2003 to 2007, the Federal Reserve was raising rates and the doubled and tripled. I think you've got a similar dynamic at some point over the next 2 to 3 years where we're probably going to have another major leg up I expect this bubble-blowing bull market is not over yet, and you want to be long high-growth stocks. You don't want to chase things that are like it was at 100. But Apple, Google, Facebook are three I've owned for many years.
Okay.
And,
So you still like the fangs, and how about the biotechs, which really were stratospheric before the recent sell-off in bios?
Two very different dynamics. And number one, I cringe when anybody uses the fang. It was long in 2003.
Okay, well, I'll go to the orthodontist after the interview.
Yeah, Google I bought on the IPO. You name this. Facebook I own since 20. I wrote a series of articles and talked about it on tradingwithcody.com and wrote articles for Wall Street Journal about how I was the only idiot buying Facebook at 20. Well, at 100 it's a lot more expensive. But yeah, I still like Facebook, Apple, Google. I do own Netflix, Amazon. I've done very well with those positions. I don't want to be a part of
you've been smart enough to avoid Twitter. Why, Cody?
What's
that?
I
found you on Twitter. You've been smart enough to avoid Twitter, or are you long bottom fishing Twitter down here?
I bottom fished Twitter around $33, and I feel like an idiot. I was bearish on Twitter after it came public because I felt like they left so darn much money on the table. I hate IPOs that double that first day because as an investor, I want to see as much cash on the balance sheet from an IPO that you can invest and use for a cushion in future years. I was so disappointed with Twitter and their IPO and their management and their growth, and I never bought the stock for about the first, year, and I eventually ended up buying it around $35, $33, and now I've got egg on my face. No, they're not all winners, let's put it that way.
Do you pay attention to any of the other asset classes? Like, it's my belief that the dollar and currencies are linchpins for equity markets. Do you pay attention to dollar movements or not at all?
I certainly am aware of them, and I'm an investor. I think gold itself and precious metals will probably be revalued during my time in the next years, not anytime soon, but at some point in the next few decades, gold and silver get revalued because of this fiat currency, 0% interest rate, central control of our economy and markets that we have. And but the dollar itself as a proxy or as a tell or a way to game stock markets ahead of time, I think they move too much in tandem. And I don't think certainly the dollar being weak in some sense is good for stock markets, but as a citizen of this country, I want the dollar to be as strong as possible always, because that's what I'm paid in. People pay me. They spend $99 a month reading my services at tradingwithcody.com, and I want that $99 to have as much buying power and as much value as it possibly can. So I like a strong dollar as a citizen and as an investor. Frankly, I think in the grand scheme of things, I could care less whether global multinationals benefit from a lower dollar. I want everybody in this country and the citizens of this country to be as wealthy as possible, and I think Main Street wants a strong dollar because it's in their...
Okay, I'll make you feel at home again. King dollar, king dollar, king dollar. Who's that?
That's not bad, not bad. Let's say, actually, biotech a minute ago, and I'm short biotech. One of the best, luckiest timed trades of my life was last Friday. I actually shorted with my tradingwithcody.com subscribers, sent out a trade alert and shorted it myself. Valiant, VRX, which
it's
this week down 50% since I shorted it on Friday. I feel like a genius. Of course, I've covered about half of that. And I think biotech in general is about to go, and the reason I shorted Valiant wasn't because I thought they were fraudulent, although there were questions in the numbers before this week anyway, and I thought that was a good kicker for my short. But I think pricing in biotech and in healthcare in general is about to get scrutinized. The Obamacare and Medicare, Medicaid, and Republican Democrat regime, both sides of the party have been allowing these healthcare companies, biotech companies, and their lobbyists and attorneys to write the laws, and these prices have been just through the roof.
You think Hillary got short?
95%.
I think Hillary probably got short a load before her comments on pharmaceutical companies and drug prices. That's going to have a lot of headline risk going into the campaign. And I want to switch gears with you a little bit and go first domestically, politically. You know, we're into this election cycle. There's going to be a lot of barbs thrown out about different industries, and you know, Donald Trump isn't owned by any lobbyist. What's your view of the political landscape?
Donald Trump is owned by his own lobbyists. I mean, come on, let's keep it real around here. He's not on my side, that's for sure.
Okay, and why is that?
No Republican, no Democrat on this planet is on my side. Every Republican and Democrat on this planet who's in power, close to power,
they're owned by multinationals.
They're all
basically the same party.
By the corporatist movement and the underground lobbyists and the above ground lobbyists, and you know, that's one of the reasons again that I've been so bullish on the stock market is because the Republican-Democrat regime in tandem focuses on the stock market, focuses on corporate profits, and uses taxpayer money, consolidates it, central control, just like Obamacare, just like the bank bailouts. All of that benefits corporations, not individuals, not Main Street. And it's great for the stock market while it lasts, but it's not good for my country. And I'm never going to vote for a Republican or a Democrat in a national election under any circumstance. And I've been saying that for 7 years since the bailouts went through, and it disillusioned me from the regime that's in power, both sides. People say there's two different sides, but...
So what do you think would change? The picture, and you know, even the Fed, you have to say, they talk about the wealth effect and how higher recovering home prices and equities has been part of their mandate, stated or unstated, right? Right.
Well, and the biggest driver of wealth disparity in this country isn't technology, it's not real estate, it's not the stock market by themselves. It is the tax policies and the incentives and subsidies that Tesla gets when the Republican-Democrat regime in Nevada builds them a free factory. It's the subsidies that Apple gets when they're paying a 10% tax rate, and I, as a small business owner, am paying a 30% tax rate. It's the guy selling hot dogs at Stadium who's subsidizing Jerry Jones and his billionaire stadium, while the guy selling hot dogs making $7 and paying taxes to help subsidize that. That's what's causing the biggest wealth disparity. And as far as the Republican-Democrat regime and ending it or fighting it, I think you've got to just go independent. I never on a Republican or a Democrat because I know either way it's going into corporations' pockets. And I only vote for either write-ins or true independents who have never been a Republican or a Democrat in office.
Are there any geo spots that bother you? You know, Putin's been on the scene, flexing his muscles both on camera and in Syria and in Ukraine. And are there any geo hotspots that could throw cold water on this whole central planning type of environment we've been in? In fact, I was reading yesterday, and it's the first time I heard of it, that since the sanctions have been put in place, we all know Russia very dependent on oil prices to fund their economy, that there are guys pushing the central bank, which is, they say, still has ties to all the other global central banks. When they were raising rates to protect the ruble, there's a Putin advisor suggesting that they impose capital control so the oligarchs can't go to the lowest rate, and even talking about a strategic default on Russian debt. Well, what do you think about the Russian debt?
It's a great question, and I do think Russia specifically is probably the highest risk of geopolitical turmoil and creating some sort of a black swan type catalyst to the downside in our own stock markets. Geopolitical happenings themselves, though, are always something you need to be aware of, especially when stocks are near all-time highs, like we're getting closer to again. When they get priced in and stocks are down 50%, you know, it's probably time to start buying stocks and not worry so much about geopolitical events. But yeah, I think Putin himself and Russia is something that's on my radar. what they've done in Crimea and just the entire Middle East region, even with Syria, I think is a big factor. Again, I'm not endorsing the Republican-Democrat approach to geopolitics in any way, shape, or form. I want my soldiers and citizens of this country home and not policing the Middle East and drone
More like
bombing.
a Rand Paul libertarian approach. Defend the homeland.
That's right. That's right. I don't want us drone bombing people of any religion or race anywhere on the planet, and that's what Republicans and Democrats both do equally. And again, it's the reason why I want nothing to do with their parties. The Russia sanctions, by the way, were meaningless compared to oil dropping from 80 to 45.
Yeah. Very good point.
What sanctions do to Russia, they're meaningless compared to the fact that Russia's just lost half of their source of income as the price of the unit price of oil, which is what they depend on for their economy, has dropped in half.
Well, you know, perhaps we've gone through a paradigm shift with fossil fuels here. Does that mean that you see opportunities in green energy as the old economy based on fossil fuels gives way to a greener economy?
Sure. I actually was a long-time bear on alternative energy when it was so fully subsidized and being wrapped, you know, and basically writing laws for ethanol and solar and all the billions of dollars of taxpayer money that went into funding these businesses.
And to use food while people are starving for fuel.
Yeah, genius. Republican Democrats again. You know, oil has come down. I think you've got at least 10 or 15, 20 years before oil ever sees $70 or $80 or $90 a barrel again. I got bullish and flip-flopped from a bear to bull on alternative energy, and I still own First Solar from probably about 1/4 the price it is right now. Got some nice gains in First Solar, and I still hold it. I do think solar. I don't like wind energy because there's too many moving parts. I like solar. Bang for you on every unit of electricity you get out of solar is about to cross under fossil fuel anyway, and eventually, over the next 10 years, solar is probably going to be the dominant way that we get energy at our homes and businesses.
Cody, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak to our community today. I'm a fan. The best way for people to follow your work on Twitter, I know your handle is @Cody Willard. Where else could they follow your work? On Spotify?
You can actually get access to all of my trades and report from largest position to smallest position at tradingwithcody.com and on the Trading with Cody apps for iPhone and Android. You can find me on Scutify. And my podcast on iTunes, and I also do Periscope. I Periscope my podcasts, and I put those out about 2 or 3 times a week. So, and then I'm also on realmoney.com, thestreet.com with Jim Cramer these days. USA Today, you can find me. Mark, I'm all over.
All right, Cody, where can't we find you?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and apparently you can find me on FX Street too.
Cody, great meeting you, my trading warrior brother. Thanks for speaking to us today and sharing your views, and really appreciate and hope that you have a lot of prosperity during this fall trading season, my friend.
You too. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Great questions. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Cody.